With Allah's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. Assalamu alaikum, dear family and friends. It is indeed a privilege to be with you again. So let us begin in remembrance of Allah. Imam Faheem, could you please open us in prayer? Take yourself off mute.
Alhamdulillah. Good?
Yes, sir.
Alhamdulillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma anta salam. You are the peace. Wa minka salam. From you come the peace. Tabarakta ya zul jalali wal ikram. Blessed are you, Lord of majesty and honor. Allahumma sallallahu Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim wa barak ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim fil alamin innaka Hamidum Majid. Oh Allah, bless Muhammad and the followers of Muhammad, and bless the followers of as you did bless the followers of Abraham, and bless us to live that life, and bless us to carry out the lives that we should live as Muslims under your guidance, and bless us this day and forgive us our errors and our shortcomings. We beg your aid and assistance in all things. Ameen. Ameen.
Ameen. Ameen. Thank you, Imam Faheem. So before we get started, let me share the intended purpose for presenting this discussion on polygyny, because I know it's a hot topic. I've heard from many of you. It is purely to educate from the Qur'an, the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the law in the United States of America. Our speakers are Imam Faheem, who needs no introduction. He is known and respected for his Islamic scholar, and I'll go to Imam for marriage. We also have attorney Aisha Rahman. I first met Aisha and began working with her approximately 10 years ago when she served as KARAMAH's executive director. It's an organization of Muslim lawyers for human rights. She now resides in Atlanta, where she has opened her private practice and attends the Masjid there. She is our community member. Many of you may know that Rama Abdul Alim is the sitting executive director of KARAMAH, and she is vacationing with her family. So welcome, Imam Faheem, and welcome, attorney Aisha. We are honored to have you. The format today is a Q&A, and for our listening audience, if you have any questions, please place them in the chat box. So before we begin, we need to first understand the terms, the definitions of these terms. So, attorney Aisha, can you briefly give us the legal definition of polygyny and polygamy?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I didn't hear anyone from Atlanta, and I was getting a little sad about that, but hopefully there's someone here from Atlanta. Thank you so much for having me. As Sister Fitrah said, I'm very pleased and honored to be here. I lived in DC for a very long time, and I heard someone else say that they were from Masjid Muhammad, and I miss Masjid Muhammad every day. I really wish that I was closer. When I lived in DC, I was so close to the Masjid. Atlanta is, as many of you probably know, very spread apart, and so I'm not as close. So I'm just very honored to be here. In terms of the legal definition, so Sister Fitrah was talking when we were talking earlier about how it's actually quite a simple issue, but unfortunately nothing in the law is simple. So generally speaking, and I know Imam Faheem is going to talk about this, polygyny is when a man has more than one female partner. And legally, that is what polygyny is. Polygamy is when people of all genders can have multiple partners in marriage, irrespective of gender. And so while I say it's not complicated, or it is complicated, every state has its own laws. And so if you were to just Google law in Georgia for polygamy, there may only be a law for bigamy, because that was at one point in time the more commonly practiced, having a second partner only, or a second spouse only. So there may not be a legal definition in your state of polygamy versus polygyny. It may be just a bigamy law. But for the purposes, I think, of today's conversation, we're going to be talking about polygyny with an N, not an M, which is when a man has more than one female partner.
Absolutely. Today, and the reason I asked that is because many times people refer to polygyny as polygamy, and it's incorrect. So I wanted to make sure that we understood today we are talking about a man having more than one partner, a wife, in our language. So, Brother Imam, Faheem,
Yes.
because I've heard so many different definitions, translations on that ayat that refers to polygyny in the Quran, could you please first of all clarify what is the correct translation that refers to polygyny, and is polygamy in the Quran?
I'm going to share something here.
Sure.
And the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the primary verse that speaks to polygyny is this one in general. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ عِلَى تُخْسِتُوا فِي يَتِيمَ فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُمْ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَّعَ فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ إِلَّا تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدَةً أو ما ملكت أيمانكم ذلك أدنى إلى تعولوا. صدق الله العظيم. Now, when I can't claim and I know you Fitrah, you have to do your job and you're doing it well, alhamdulillah. But to say the correct translation, there are going to be many translations, and translations are interpretations. There are, technical, textual definitions, but even definitions themselves in reality are only hints. But I'm not going to stay on that. I'm just going to walk through this, but I just wanted to be clear that I'm not, whatever it is that I'm saying, I'm not saying that this is the correct definition, i.e. / only and main definition, a translation of this verse. But let's finish this. So, and if you fear, ila tukhsitu, that is, you can't do justice. And actually, I'm going to come to, God willing, that if I have the time to make the distinction between what's being said there, tukhsitu fil yatima, that is between or for or with or to the orphans, fankihu, then marry. There's another little thing in there that I'll get to, because the word that we translate as marriage is not only marriage, but mataba, then choose of those who you like from among the women, 3, that is 2 or 3 or 4, we know that. But in kiftum, but if you feel that you can't do justice, now you can see, if you see that there are 2 words. This, you have tuqsitu, this is qist. I mean, the root of this is what translates as justice generally. And this adl, and this is talking about fairness. And there's a distinction between 3 terms that inshallah I'll bring up on the next on the next page. It says, if you're unable to treat them with justice, then marry only one. That is, if you can't distribute in the appropriate way all that should be distributed in a marriage between more than one, then it's better that it be for one or those whom your right hand possess. And I know people would oftentimes prefer a long discussion, conversation, clarification on, well, what is the right hand possess? But in this context, the short, quick version is it's basically women who have come into slavery, because slavery was, you can call it the order of the day just for the sake of brevity. Slavery was not uncommon. It was that was what was going on. Also, women who had come into a man's charge, quote unquote, by virtue, parenthetically, vice of war. And so therefore they are right hand possessed in that regard. But on one level, the reality is that she would become halal to him under those circumstances. But the invitation is to actually make her a wife, not just to have sexual access to her because of her dependency. But that was a part of the feature of the time. And at this moment, Allah is saying, this is better for you than to be unjust to a multiplicity of wives. ذَلِكَ أَدْنَى إِلَى تَعُولُوا. He said, this is better for you that you avoid injustice. This note from Maududi is very, very helpful in this. He's reporting a hadith or reporting the understanding of the scholars in this area. Sa'id ibn Jubair and Qatada and some other commentators say that while the Arabs of the Jahiliyyah period did not approve of subjecting orphans to wrong, they had no concept of justice and equity with regard to women. That there's a strangeness that we have to get into the consciousness of the Jahil Arab at the time. People who can have, it's not right to be unjust to orphans. This is Allah knows, but I'm just saying this is one of the reasons why Allah brought that up first. It's like treat the orphans justly, because they already had in their idea, in their mind and in their culture, no, you can't abuse or misuse orphans, even though they were doing it. But the point is that in the context of that and marriage and women, they had no problem. Even they had no concept of justice and equity with regard to women. I mean, sort of like, what kind of cognitive dissonance was in their heads at that time. Finishing this, they married as many women as they wanted and then subjected them to injustice and oppression. It is in this context that people are told that if they fear perpetuating wrongs on orphans, they ought to be equally worried about perpetuating them on women. In the first place, they should never marry more than 4. And of those 4, they should marry only as many as they can treat fairly. I'll step away from my commentary, but I do need to go back to the top. The Holy Qur'an has declared polygyny as halal. That's obviously important. It is only qualified by a recommendation. That is, Allah said it's halal, it's permitted. It's not commanded, it's not ordered. He said, you can do it, right? It's only qualified by a recommendation to the man not to do so if he fears his own inability to not be prejudicial or biased. Therefore, it is open and it's permitted to be engaged in, and it is for the males and the females. There are benefits on both sides of the male and the female. There's good potential on both sides, male and female. Though reflexively, we have a tendency to often first see it as though it is a privilege for men. Let me go to this this issue of definition here, and I'll be finished with this comment, inshallah. So these words are very important words to understand how we are to behave in the presence of in marriage, and in answer to this question. The Qur'an mentions polygyny only once explicitly, and that's the verse we just read, and advises against it if you fear you will not be able to deal justly with orphans. Inside that verse, you have two words, qist and adl is in there. In other areas, when it comes to marriage, ma'ruf also comes up, and it's a major term in our life. I'm going to go ahead, for the sake of time, I'm going to cut to the bottom of the ma'ruf. Essentially focuses on positively proactive, being positively proactive towards others. So ma'ruf is to act that way. So adl is to not be prejudicial or biased. So it says, if you don't think you cannot be prejudicial or biased, then that's God is saying, well, then you should do something else. You should not take in more than one wife because you can't do adl. The qist relates to the orphans, and it's a longer conversation that we're not going to have right now, but if time permits and circumstances invite, we will come back to it. But the issue of qist is the issue of judging and acting equitably with respect to the rights and the interest of all parties. So that means it really is much more material in terms of the distribution of property and the treatment of wealth and fairness in terms of respecting everybody's interest involved with it. So God is saying, if you can't be equitable, judging properly, we have an attorney on the panel, so the role that the judge is supposed to play in making that decision is qist. So for us, as husbands, let's say, as an example, then we are to make sure that everybody's interest is respected and everybody's rights in a matter are given due regard, and the pie is cut up the way the pie is supposed to be cut up. That's a big part of it, and no doubt that's going to come back again. So I'll step back out for this.
Yes, we will come back to this because we do need to know more about the criteria and the circumstances. But Aisha, Attorney Aisha, let me ask you this. Is polygyny legal in any part of the United States? I mean, I already know the answer, but I want you to address it because I want to ask the second part of it. And can you be charged with a crime?
Polygyny is not legal in any state. Yes, you can be charged with a crime. So it really depends. Again, as I said in my initial opening comments, every state is different, and every state criminalizes polygyny in different ways. So in some states, it's considered a felony, and there's a $10,000 fine and potential imprisonment. In states like Utah, for example, which we can certainly talk about later, it's a smaller fine. It's $750, and there's not as much imprisonment. In my experience, just anecdotally, having been practicing law for a while now, it's not if people find out about it, like all these TV shows that are coming out with having multiple spouses, that's when the authorities are sort of pushed to investigate it. But in general, I haven't heard, and I hope I don't, but I haven't heard of, police coming into Muslim communities, for example, necessarily to seek it out. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that's, again, is there a potential of that happening? Absolutely. We know that policing of our communities is unfortunately something that law enforcement doesn't shy away from. But generally speaking, we haven't seen it a great deal. But yes, short answer is yes, you can be charged with a crime in most states.
Yeah, but I want to establish whether it's legal in the land because I once heard a policeman tell someone when they were charging him, coming to arrest him. And he said, but a lot of people do this. And the policeman responded to him by saying, yeah, but we're not after them. We're after you. And so now we're going to use this against you.
Sure.
So let me follow that up with the question of, we know that there are rare cases when polygyny is recognized, though it's not legal. What are some of the circumstances that make it recognizable, and what proof is required to establish it?
Sure. So again, it's a longer conversation, but when you say recognized, there's a lot of people, even the term recognized, but recognized by whom, for example. So I think that in Georgia, I'll give Georgia as an example. In Georgia, once upon a time, there was what was considered common law marriage. That has gone away now. But there was at a time common law marriage, and an Islamic marriage ceremony, as long as it was officiated by an officiant, etc., was considered marriage. There didn't need to be a legal registration of that marriage. There didn't need to be any court documents. A nikah or a kitab, the marriage document that we get from our mosques and other community organizations, was sufficient, even witnessing. So even if there wasn't a legal document, someone who says, I was present at the marriage ceremony of Aisha Rahman, would have been sufficient to establish that there was a marriage. But again, just speaking about Georgia, that has gone away. And so now there is this sort of requirement of a legal registration of the marriage. So it really depends on, when you say the word recognized, who are we talking about it being, who recognizing the marriage? Because of course in Islam, and I know Imam Faheem will talk about this, one of the things that is required in our faith, and I think, again, there's some dispute about this, is the pronouncement of the marriage. So not just you are married, but there's, we sometimes call it ishar, like there is Aisha is married to so-and-so, and it's publicly known. And I think that recognized term, I think is really a technical one to say recognized by the community, certainly, but recognized by a legal official, no. I mean, in most states, I think what's going to happen is, if you are not the first spouse in a document or established, and we can definitely talk about taxes and all these other ways of establishing marriage that have come up in polygyny cases that I've seen and I've worked on. But if a judge is recognizing it, they're only going to recognize that first in time, legal, documented, certified marriage.
So, Brother Imam Faheem, what kind of documents are required? Are there any documents required in order to, because Aisha, I want to come back to you, because when I say recognize, I mean recognized by the community as well as by the legal system, because we do know of, like you mentioned, Utah, we do know that the legal system is recognizing it, though it's not permissible. But before we answer that, I want to first ask Imam Faheem, what type of documents are recognized by the community regarding polygyny? What kind of documents should a marriage have outside of a marriage certificate, if that's the only thing?
Well, no, frankly, personally, in all of my years as an imam, I've never conducted a ceremony for what would result in a polygynous marriage. And all of my years as imam, I do require a certificate. This is you asking me, so I'm giving you my answer, yes. Right? I do require that there be a certificate from the county, etc., whoever they may be, for that. The reason for that, for me, is the infrastructure for having your rights defended, recognized, upheld as mother, father, husband, wife. We don't have Muslim. We can recognize the marriage, But when things go, unfortunately, south, it's like, okay, then how do you deal with custody, and how do you deal with property, and how you deal with access to, whatever, your children, wherever they may be. And that's between the father and the mother. So for me, because of the absence of our power of enforcement of what we do recognize, I since I can't help someone in really informal ways, if things do end in divorce, then I always require the marriage certificate. So we can create our own certificates that have their ceremonial and value, but as far as in law and being able to enforce the rights and make sure that equitable treatment is had by everyone, we don't. So that's my answer.
Brother Imam, I'm gonna have to put you on the spot a little bit.
Go ahead, doesn't matter.
Because I understand that is not what you do, and
Okay.
I can only hear so many sisters in the background shouting hallelujah that we have an imam that won't perform a marriage without a certificate of marriage. Right. But they are performing marriages out there. And
I'm gonna use something that you just gave. He said, but I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about me.
I know, but you're here, Brother Imam, and
go ahead.
You're trying to help us as a community to understand what needs to be in place. And Aisha, I'm coming to you because whatever he says, I want to know from you, because I know that you counsel on dowries, and I want to know what kind of recommendations you would make for those who are practicing it. And if Brother Imam, so I'm asking you, what I understand you can't enforce it. I know.
Are you talking to me, or are you talking to her?
I'm talking to you right now, Imam Faheem.
Okay. Well, then, okay.
Because wait a minute, I want to just say this, because I know even in legal marriages, we can't enforce what legally sometimes is being agreed upon unless we go through the courts and everything. But I want to know from you, for sisters out there and brothers who are engaging in this. We already know it's not legal. We already know all of that.
All right.
What would you recommend? And if you say nothing, then
all right. Let's do this. Okay. So what I just told you is, as a practical matter, and what I have done has served in my situation environment well, as I've said, for 40 years.
Yes, I understand.
Let me make this statement from Imam Muhammad, and I don't want to take up a whole lot of time, but something, this ain't no simple 5-minute conversation. Okay, let's move on. Okay, I got you. So the sooner I can finish, the sooner we can keep the ball moving, right? Okay, so Imam Muhammad, rahimahullah, and it is absolutely true. When you go back to quote unquote even Islamic time, I mean, when the Prophet established Islam and Jahiliyyah was moving out, etc., there were no certificates, there were no licenses, etc. The recognition was inside the culture itself, because of the fact that this is how we do it. The rules, which still stand for us as Muslims: 2 witnesses, an accepted dowry, and a walima. You do that, you're married, right? And it's recognized wherever those Muslims are, 2 or 3 or 4, absolutely, right? Now, Imam Muhammad, rahimahullah, he said, listen, the reduction of, and there's a book that I know of, Imam Mikhail. When I was coming to Chicago, I was reading this book at that time, but it escapes me right now. But the idea is that the Imam said that the marriage licensing process in the society that we're in was the white man's effort to control sexual access. That's what his licensing is saying. No, you can only have one wife. Who are you? Who are you to say you can only have one? Well, it's my society. It's my order. It's my say. whether it's based on Bible and a man cling to his wife, they become flesh and flesh, bone and bone, mashallah. Okay. But the point is, it is a social construct. I know that's a very dangerous word to say nowadays. And it is a social construct. And in consequence of that, so for as far as Muslims are concerned, even when you look at the literacy, the people of the Jahiliyyah period, their very name is ignorance, but it's youthful ignorance that you can be taught out of that kind of ignorance. But also, we were also a people called Ummi. I'm identifying myself with that group. Ummi, unlettered. The Prophet himself was unlettered. So who's going to be going around getting contracts in order to be married? No, we weren't in fact, the people of Badr, y'all know the rest of the story. People of Badr who were fighting against the Muslims, one of the ways that they could be ransomed is that they teach 10 people how to read and write. All right. So it's not, so that's not the case. Now, so this is one of the critical things that those who quote unquote practice it, and because you got a whole lot of YouTube videos and et cetera, people talking about the abuses of it, et cetera, because the full context of what polygyny is under and from God as revelation, that's not what's being practiced, right? When we have these kinds of problems. If we would practice it the way, both males and females, if we would practice it the way that Allah has ordered it, it's going to be peace. It's going to be pleasant. It's going to be conducive to the development of that. But you have to know, I see one of the things I haven't talked about, but the idea, I need to back out because I don't want to keep taking up a lot of time. But the idea is that there's a context for how the right thing to do, way to do it as a revelation from Allah. So the documentation and the enforcement wherewithal that's in the society that we have as a result of the certification of things, okay, well, that's the nature of this environment that we're in. But as Muslims stepping outside of that, then we should operate under our own law, I don't know, de facto or de jure. Let's ask the attorney what those two things mean. But in terms of actually doing what you're actually told to do without a written fixed law other than what Allah has revealed. If you would just do that, all will be well.
Yeah, Brother Imam, but we know that, let's fast forward it to 2023. And I'm only saying that to say, I'm again, remember, this is education. And what you're giving people, the women and men, is the understanding to take away all of those false pretenses of what they believe or not believe. And so this is what we're doing here today. Okay. And that's why I'm delving just a little bit deeper, because I've already heard from all the sisters and their question. So Aisha, because you do counsel on dowries, I want to know, are there any documents that can be put into place so that in this land that we live, that a sister can be protected in a polygamous relationship?
Sure, thank you. Okay, so Brother Imam said a lot of things that I am nodding my head at, and I'm smiling, and I'm commenting. There's a lot of things to say, but on the issue of documentation, I'm going to kind of come at this in a circuitous way. So what Imam said, I think, is really important, that there is a construct around this idea of licensing and what is considered marriage. And in the United States context. And certainly when we talk about rights, so one of the reasons why people may have a reaction to say that polygyny is it's not fair, to perhaps a second wife, because and I'll just talk about Georgia, and I'm licensed in DC, I'm licensed in Tennessee, so I can talk a little bit about different states, but since I'm sitting in Georgia, I'll talk about Georgia. The second wife is not going to get the rights that are written in the law books in Georgia. And what does that mean? Equitable distribution of assets, even child support, which we can come back to in a minute. Now, there's other rights that a wife, a recognized wife or husband by the law are going to get. Now, a lot of Muslims, let's forget polygyny for a second, and let's just talk about one marriage, a man and a woman.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Muslims back in the day when alimony was more common. It is not as common now, which I can certainly talk about later as well. A lot of Muslims didn't feel like an award of long-term alimony was Islamically valid. I know many women who got an award for alimony for their lifetime, because in the past, what used to happen is you would get spousal support until you married again or until you died. And a lot of people said that's not Islamic. And so these women were giving their money away as sadaqah because they didn't want it to be considered against them or counted against them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as getting unjust enrichment, to use legal language, from the marriage. Again, not going to talk about that, but the idea is being Muslim and holding your Islamic values in a construct or a context that may not always recognize what you believe is your rights in marriage can be difficult, obviously. But I think that on the issue of documentation and is there anything that we can do, I think that, when I first started my career, I was just like, nope, it's not fair. And the Qur'an says it has to be fair. So I'm done on this topic. And there was a woman who came to me, it was actually in Atlanta, who said, I take issue with what you just said. And the reason I take issue with what you said is I think she was in her 50s. She was like, I'm still a young woman. I'm widowed and I have my own home in my own name. I'm working. I have my own career. I have my own income and I don't want to commit zina. So I am not necessarily the prime candidate for a first wife scenario, but I am in a polygyny situation where I have a husband, and Islamically we're married, of course, and he visits me on these days and whatnot, and it works for me given my situation, where I am in my age, financial situation, etc. It's what works for me, and I didn't want to commit zina. And that comment from her just was a light bulb to me to think, I need to think a little bit outside the box and even open up my mind to the fact that this is working for people, for some people, not for all. So what documentation did she need? Well, she needed a house in her own name. She needed her own bank account with her own name on it. So here's just really quickly on the law. If you are married, so I'm sitting in a house right now. I am married, alhamdulillah. This house is in my husband's name only. The reason we did that was because sorry, my child is saying, Mommy, I think she just discovered that I'm here. I apologize.
No.
The reason why
background music, it's good.
The public, we did not want my address to be known publicly. And you can pull records at the deeds office. But I know I'm protected because in Georgia, it doesn't matter whose name is on the house. If I'm married and it was bought during the marriage, it's at least half mine. Okay. It doesn't have my name on it. Okay. And that is a quote unquote benefit that a second spouse is not going to get. So if my husband were to take a second wife, she would not have access to this house because legally in Georgia, she's not recognized as a spouse, even if she put money towards it. I don't know. Like there are scenarios where people are having multiple people live in the same house. If she comes in and she makes renovations, she wants to have a private entrance to her room. She wants to have a bigger bathroom, a second master bedroom, and she renovates it with her own money. Legally, she doesn't have access to this house. And that's perhaps unfair because she's putting her money towards it. So I think that what I would advise women if they are to enter into a polygynous situation is this. that same law of it being a marital property doesn't exist when you're not married, right? So if you have a bank account and it's only in your name, it's only in your name. Your ceremonial husband, your Islamic husband, but not legal husband, can't come in and get access to that bank account in a court of law because it's only in your name. Similarly, if there's a house that's titled in your name, he cannot come in, even if he paid towards it. That's when the name on the deed or the name on the title matters, because in a non-marital context, and no disrespect to people who are married Islamically, to Georgians, you're just considered a girlfriend. You're a girlfriend that has her own bank account and has her own house. Well, it's sad to say that a girlfriend may have more rights. You know, again, I don't want to be disrespectful from a religious context, but if your name is on it, it's yours. And so what a woman may want to think about, if you're worried about your financial rights, you may want to think about titling things, property, money, assets in your name. You also can write a contract, a simple contract, not a marriage contract, but just a contract that says, here are the things that you have agreed to give me. You're going to agree to give me a lump sum of this. You're going to agree to do this. And it's a notarized document. In the event of a Islamic divorce, you can go to the courts and initiate a case for an enforcement of a contract. So you can say, we have a contractual agreement that in the event of XYZ happening, these are the things that he was going to give me or do for me. So something to think about. The other thing I wanted to just quickly remark on is on the issue of custody and children. When a child, and this is very patriarchal, very white man law, but your name on the birth certificate doesn't matter. People think like, oh, my name's on the birth certificate, so I'm the father. No, in most states, that is not the case. If you are not lawfully engaged in marriage, but so legally recognized, you are the only person who has rights to a child is the mother. So what's going to happen is you need brothers that are on the phone call need to know that you're looking at, if there's a breakup situation, you're going to need to establish paternity, which is a legal case. Now, establishing paternity is quite simple, or it could be quite complicated. If the mother says, yes, he is the father, she goes to the court and says, yes, he's the father, done. Case is over. It takes 2 minutes. And I've seen that happen, and it happens a lot. If for whatever reason, mom is maybe emotional, maybe whatever her reason may be, doesn't want to say he is the father of my child, then the case takes on a longer pattern. So you have to establish paternity through a blood test, etc. And only then would you be obligated to pay child support. Islamically, of course, you need to support your child. I mean, I'm going to let the Imam talk about this. I'm not here necessarily to talk about the Islamic rulings, but it is very widely accepted that a father has an obligation to financially support his children. So this is where you're kind of doing this dance between Islamic rights and the law and the law in the United States. But documentation wise, I just wanted to bring up that birth certificate issue because a lot of people feel that is sufficient, and it's not.
Brother Imam, this is a question that comes up all the time, and it is, does the first wife have to approve of her husband taking additional wives in order for the brother to have another wife?
No.
What did you say?
Yeah. No, no. So I'm loving what Aisha is doing in context of, okay, this is what the legal is. Okay, I'm gonna stay over here in my yard, which is, the Qur'an and Sunnah to the extent that I know it.
Yes.
And there is no precedent for that as a requirement. No. All right. But there's another angle. I want to turn this telescope around and look at this thing from a another dimension. I'm gonna not look at my notes, even though I have matter in the. Let me share. I think it'll actually be shorter if I actually do share. Then I won't have to elaborate so much.
Please go ahead. Mm-hmm.
All right. So yeah, here, okay, right here. So we're talking about equity, right? We're talking about equity, literally and figuratively, that is abstractly and concretely. You know, equity in property, equity in terms of what I have a quote unquote a right to, and the like, and respecting the mutual rights that we have in the marital relationship. There seems to be a tacit assumption that, like, men don't have anything to answer for in this situation. Okay, what should a woman do in this case? And what should a woman do? Okay, wait. What should a man do in relationship to this? It's sort of like, oh, I ain't got a lot to think about. I just got to decide, how many I want, which one I want. And no, not if you're talking about being a Muslim and in service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and engaging in that process that he's made halal for you. There's certain assumptions that have been made about how that's to be engaged in by the man. And I want to just give a little clarification. What is the primary design of marriage from Allah for the nature of men and women? I'm only going to read a translation of it. I don't want to, I'm not trying to get in all the technical details for the sake of time as well. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله. Okay, Sadaqallahu al-Azim. Quick expression of it. Men are the protectors and maintainers of women because Allah has made one of them to excel the other in strength, and because they spend out of their possessions to support them. In respect of this, righteous women are devoutly obedient to Allah and guard the rights of the husband in their absence under Allah's protection. So the Quran tells us that the adult males, here we're now talking about just the fundamental responsibility. This is not the broad, it's not, I do this, I'm done. No, this is the foundation. Adult males are expected to guarantee food, clothing, shelter for themselves, their dependent children, and the adult females in the family. This verse also addresses the fundamental expectation of the female in a marriage. So everybody has rights and obligations inside of marriage. And this verse, just reading as just monogamy, reading as just as one. Okay, so when we start talking about well, see, that's something else. I don't want to go into all this. What I will say, without going to that, maybe if we come back to that. What I'm saying is this: a part of that equity, Aisha talked about, if the woman wanted to add room to the house, etc. The man is supposed to have two houses. He's supposed the same house that Aisha, pray I got it right. The same house that Aisha has. Okay, wife number two, equity says she's supposed to have the same thing. You can't have one living in a trailer home, a mobile home, a camper, and the other one is living in a penthouse. No. If you're going to have two wives, you got to have two setups for two women that is equal. And that's also the other side. That's also the other side of it. The other side of it is just the reasoning behind the whole issue of approval. If wife number one has to approve wife number two, then if wife number two comes in, well, who's the boss? In terms of, oh, okay, I'm the primary wife, you're the secondary wife. No, you're supposed to be equal. It's not like you sub wives are not equal to. Now, even though that's going to tacitly happen in some way. I've been with him longer than you've been with him. You just came in here and you just so and so and so and so. So I'm gonna back out of it. But the bottom line is, in order to do polygyny, to do it right in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means do what you do for one, do for the other. What you do for this one, do for that. What you do for these children, do for those children. Okay, so that speaks to the caliber and the quality and the character of the man and his capability in order to be in polygyny. So sometimes women accept to come into a polygynous relationship where the man is not really qualified on all these several levels to actually manage it. I haven't even talked about the emotional intelligence and all of this other kind of competency that you have to have for communication and for delegation and dealing with justice and equity and problems between the children of the two and the wives themselves. So it's like, frankly, Allahu Alam, I'm not certain that most of the men who do quote unquote practice polygyny are really competent, character capable, and financially equipped to do what Al-Islam, not what Faheem said, to do what Al-Islam says you're supposed to do. Now look, mashallah, I've been accused of breaking some of it. It wasn't my intention. It's kind of like, hey, it's like, if either you can do it or you can't do it. And if you come into a situation and he's not really capable of doing what Al-Islam said, then you don't really have much to say when you walked in with your eyes open and you knew what the rules were, but you accepted something that was substandard relative to the standards of Al-Islam, then it's on a mashallah program then.
But Imam Faheem, I want you to know that I heard the Imam say, may he be in the highest place, say exactly what you just said.
MashaAllah.
I heard him say that in Chicago when he first started addressing the issue of polygyny. And brought it up publicly. I heard him say that we in this community were not ready to do it because of these circumstances, everything you just quoted. But in that question, let me kind of flip that question around when you talk about doing it correctly. So I'm asking this question. Is it the more correct way that if the circumstances are identified, some of the circumstances that both you and Aisha have pointed out here, the age of the person or the children or whatever the circumstances are, is it a more appropriate or according to the Islamic standards that the brother at least sit down with his wife before he decides, oh, there's a sister I want to marry, and talk about these kinds of things?
Of course.
And so then in answering that question, she really does, they together begin to, if that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know of a marriage, at least one, where the first wife, no, I know two now, they're coming to mind, where the first wife was inviting particular women to the husband because of what they knew about their own personal situation, and that she invited that, and it was accepted by the husband and the wife of the second wife, and the second wife accepted to come into that arrangement. Even when we talk about ma'ruf, right? Ma'ruf is talking about, isn't it better? Doesn't it make more sense? Isn't it more useful? Isn't it more excellent to, let's talk about this. This is what may happen. This is what I'm considering. It's just, it makes good sense, because after that, absent that, it's going to be destructive emotionally to the existing structure. So it's like, here's a saying, it's not a hadith, but it's a useful saying, I believe, that monogamy is food and polygyny is medicine. Monogamy is food and polygyny is medicine. So it's like polygyny is designed to protect from certain ills, both inside especially inside the society, but also inside the individuals themselves, right? And so you could talk about the urges and impulses. You could speak about it that way, but a lot of things. And then I have to say this because this is the forum to say it. Many men, myself, I know the word for women hating, I believe, is misogyny. I don't know what the man hating terminology is, because I think there's some men that think that I'm hating on men. I'm not. Look, I'm a man, right? So it's like that's it. But what many men don't understand is being connected is so critical for the female, for the woman. I'm talking about connection is like oxygen, psychologically speaking, for women. That's why they hold so much to each other, because they have this sense of community, connectedness, empathy, relatedness, etc. But their nature calls for a connection with the man. Their nature calls for, just like the man's nature calls for a connection with the female, but not as strongly and forcefully and as critically and as imperatively as it is for women. Women are suffering psychological devastation in the absence of being mated properly. It's critical. We're talking about schizophrenia, neurosis, psychosis, anxiety, all those. Because of that, we're not even talking about the kinds of things that need to be done in the world that we live in, that women are forced to do in the absence of a man, that is excruciating to the woman, right? And so those are things that. So polygyny becomes a situation where it's like, women need to be saved from those type of circumstances, and it becomes thereby an obligation on the part of men as a curative aspect for a society suffering from those kinds of absences. But Allah is saying, but if you don't think you can do it justly, if you don't think you can be fair, if you don't think you can be equitable, then stay where you are, right? Just one, all right? I'll back out.
Aisha, you can comment on that, but Brother Imam, we don't think you're hating on men, but we certainly appreciate your empathy and your compassion and your Islamic scholar and keeping and this is the purpose of this program today. Certainly, we're not going to answer all the questions, but we've answered a lot. Aisha, please, I see you, you want to make a comment where that's concerned, because you counsel women, so you know the devastation. Because I don't know how many women really want to hear that their husband wants to take on them. Although they say, well, if he had come to me first and told me before he did that, I would have been open. I don't know how true that is, but I do want to say to you, you see the devastation in marriages when men go out and they do take on other wives. And let me ask you, in this case, would a walid be relevant?
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, that's one of the things that we definitely do need more of in the culture of our community. We need it for one to actually go out looking more so for, if I and I'm not trying to be the wali for any person.
No.
Make that clear before the emails start.
So don't call you.
But that being said, it can seem crass when you first hear it, but it's proper, and that's this. It's like a real estate agent, right? A real estate agent is like you have a buyer. You have somebody that's looking for a particular location. The wali is such a person. Say, okay, what's the profile of the individual that I'm interested in helping them to find a mate? So then they tell you, okay, I'm looking for this, and this. I don't want that, and that. So the wali knows that. So now they're out and about, and they have that in their consciousness. So they may very well be able to find someone that's suitable, and maybe that's why they call him a suitor, right? Someone who can be a suitor for this individual, right? And or if the individual sees someone, then they want someone to go and check them out and have that buffer between them and what they're thinking about. That's it. So we do need to have the spirit and a layer of people who act as walis for that, because that could also hinder a lot of the failed marriages, because he's like, look, we ain't even gonna get started with that because we already see that's not gonna work because of this, that, and the other. So you can be protected, but then you can also gain greater access to a pool of potential mates.
The only
Please, Aisha.
I was going to add is, we've been talking a lot about the protection, the first wife's consent. Does she need to know? and there's some comments, questions about, does she have access to divorce, which of course is yes, or does she have to stay or participate? But I'm also just want to add a quick note to protecting the second wife's or the third wife's rights as well. You know, I think that I have experiences where a second wife didn't even know that her husband was married already to another person. And so she thought she was getting a legally valid and Islamically valid marriage. I've seen it come up more than once, 2, 3, 4 times. And later found out that, oh, you know, he's already married and now I don't have any rights, you know, so I can talk a big game about negotiations and talking in advance and having a contract and all of these things, which is all valid and true, but you may not know. And so again, to Brother Imam's point, I believe in, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has this beautiful system of the wali. And I know that it's hard because a lot of people may not have a wali for whatever reason, but even, and just to bring up an Islamic point here, my mom always taught me that backbiting is haram, but there is a permission if you, in the context of marriage, you can talk about somebody behind their back. And one of the things that I think about often in this polygyny conversation is that, because there may be people in the community who said, oh, I knew, you didn't know he was married. I knew he was married. And the question is, well, why didn't it come up beforehand? Or why didn't someone come out and say to me that this was happening or whatnot? And so I think that there needs to be some collective responsibility of fostering, inshallah, good, secure, happy unions.
Yeah, and you know, I'm sorry, Fitrah.
Sure, go ahead.
Because a big part of this longer conversation at another time has to do with the environment, the atmosphere, the culture, the community, meaning that the community has to have a set of shared values, an ethos that we say, okay, we all know this is how it goes, that's how it goes, et cetera, et cetera. And so if inside of that community, that kind of atmosphere is built up, then it is known and understood in general at large that what is right and what is wrong, what is proper, what is improper. And again, you can call it is social construct, but it evolved up naturally from the group by their shared sense of being. That is, we are a community, and in our community, we do X, Y, Z, Z, Y, X. And so, you know, you can start talking about the Amish. What keeps coming through my mind right now, I think, is it Crown Heights in Brooklyn or somewhere around in the New York area, where the Jewish community, they have their own everything, right? They got their own police, they got their own courts, they have their own neighborhoods, they have their own schools. Come on, this is America, right? So as far as Muslims are concerned, it's getting to that place where وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ ummah, where we have to have ummah, because most of these other things that are not quite in line with al-Islam is because they are being born and carried out outside of a context of true Islamic community / ummah, which is, we're not there yet, but then it's also should help us to understand why things sometimes don't arrive at the destiny and the hope that we long for. Doesn't mean that we have to give up on it, but it just means that we have to continue to construct ourselves in a way that's more conducive to the realization of our ideals. That's the work, right? And we're just trying to solve problems that are arising from an incomplete ummah. That's what we're experiencing.
But Brother Imam, I mean, and it's these kinds of discussions that let us know, that reinforce that concept of community life, those shared values, that the only way that we, this is the way to have a healthy community life is to have shared values.
Absolutely.
and to have these discussions. So we've come to the end. So Aisha, we need to know how. There are those out there that are asking. I'm looking at the questions, you know, almost every question on here you've answered. both of you. And so, but people would like to know, Aisha, how to get in touch with you. They're not going to be calling you Imam Faheem because you already said you're not going to be their Waleed, but they do want to know if you would share, if you would send me your PowerPoint that I can put it in the Study Al-Islam newsletter, and if you would maybe come back or hold your own in your own discussions, discuss your PowerPoint. Is it possible you could share your PowerPoint with us?
Well, the PowerPoint actually was really just my notes in the form of a PowerPoint. So it's not really a formal PowerPoint presentation. It was just like a pool of information I'll pull from, as I did during the course of this conversation. So the answer is not that one. I'm not going to send that one out right now, just because it's not ready for prime time. It's, you know, if I'm there with the leash on it, I'm good. But if I turn it loose without it, it could be a problem.
So I think to summarize all of this, the reality is that we need to make sure that our actions are in accord with the Qur'an and the Sunnah of Muhammad, peace be upon him. And that way we are protected from everything else. Both men and women. Would you both agree, with that summary?
Absolutely.
Or would you like to give another summary?
Absolutely. No, I mean, the religion is perfect. I would invite people, go back and look at the context in which the verse was revealed, when it was revealed. I'm talking about the cultural circumstances. You know what I'm saying? There are many people who are crossing borders in very difficult, challenging, dangerous ways to get into America. You know, and we have our complaints about America, but we ain't trying to run out of here. You know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, you know, I'll stay, but I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't like this. But the people who are running here, trying to get across the border, say whatever's going on here is better than what's going on where I'm leaving, right? Okay, so in the context of polygyny, as the Prophet ﷺ modeled it, you need to look at the condition of women and the condition of marriages and the types of marriages and the types of condition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressed when he said, look, stop this and do that. And that was the evolution. And the Prophet himself was simply trying to reconstruct an uncivilized, uncouth, savage people who were burying their women, their children alive, their babies alive. But I need to say no more about that. These people were just coming into human civilizational form. So we need to think about it in that context. I know there's more details that's required, but polygyny lived in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed it and ordered under the historical circumstances in which it was defined. It's like, it's good and it's perfect and it's right. And it would be even better with us because we are, quote unquote, in a measure, more civilized even than they were when it was prescribed. So how much better would we be able to implement it in the 21st century if we would but do what Allah has ordered? We have so many more comforts, resources, history behind us, intelligence. So it's like, you just got to live it that way rather than approach it in an uncivilized way.
Aisha, please, any last minute comments? And could you put in the chat box how you can be reached, where your practice is in Atlanta, Georgia? Aisha, I know that you have counseled many. I mean, dowries are a whole nother thing, even between the marriages, and we haven't even discussed that, but I do know that you have counseled many of our young sisters when they're getting married on dowries. And I think that's could you just quickly, briefly talk about that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I provided my email address. So if anyone needs to reach me, just scroll up, you'll see it in the comments. I'm happy to help in any way that I can. Of course, the issue of the mahar is also complicated. And I echo Brother Imam's comments that we need to have a larger conversation, perhaps, like maybe a lot of folks are asking for part 2, and I would love for him to comment on, there's a whole litany, and KARAMAH does a lot of work on this, on financial rights of women that we haven't even touched. That's beyond just the mahar. So like Imam Ali, for example, or the anha, gave a gift at divorce. People don't talk about that. So when he divorced one of his wives, gave of his own another financial sum to his soon-to-be ex-wife. And we never see that. I mean, I have been doing divorce now for 15 years, and I've never seen something like that happen. And so there's a lot in our heritage and in our history of really practicing Islam in a more full way that I hope we can talk about, certainly, and aspirationally get to. On the issue of the mahar is a gift, and it is a gift given at the time of the marriage. There are some communities that give two parts. So they'll give what's called a prompt mahar, an immediate one, and then a delayed. I've seen it in a lot of Arab communities, for example, to have this two parts. In South Asians, I'm Pakistani, it's not as common. The mahar is not seen as maintenance. So I think that that's really important. Another Imam in DC, Imam Majid, who is a wonderful Imam who I joked about this too. When I was getting married, I told him, there was a girlfriend of mine who, a woman, she was not even young. She had done this 20 years ago. She had negotiated that her mahar would be that her husband read an ayah of Qur'an every night. And Imam Majid jokingly said, well, that's beautiful, but no, Islamically, it's supposed to be financial, and there needs to be some money behind this, like whether it's a piece of jewelry or some money or something. And it was just a comical moment because so many people have different ideas around marriage and what they want, but it is a gift. It should be given I think that something should be given at the time of the marriage, because what happens a lot of times, and I don't want to sort of make it too fine a point because I know we're ending right now, but it's not an issue of divorce. So a lot of times people say, well, can I get the mahar at the divorce? Can I get the mahar in the divorce legally? And yes, you can. We'll talk about that another day. But it really shouldn't even be an issue of divorce, because it's not an issue of divorce. It's an issue of marriage. It shows a husband's willingness and the solemnity that he's bringing to the marriage to give a gift at the time of the marriage. And then at the time of divorce, then comes the conversation of maintenance and iddah and child support and and so I would just say, ask for something that gives you financial security, because it may be all that you have at the end, especially in a polygyny situation. If that's all you have, what do you need to survive for 3 to 6 months, is what just to put too fine a point on it. But think about rent, food, clothes, medicine, etc. And we can, again, talk another day about the fact that you're not on health insurance and all the other things. So anyway, that's all for now.
Well, thank you to both of you. Imam Faheem, did you want to say something before I close out?
No. Alhamdulillah, I'm grateful, for the opportunity. There were some things that I'm glad I had the opportunity to say on this format with the many people listening. And I'm confident that what I've said is true, but I'm also confident that more details and time is needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think everyone realizes that. I can look at the questions that are coming up. They're repetitive. So obviously, a lot of what has been said still doesn't satisfy the questioner. But again, this is a conversation that needs to be ongoing if with those who are going to engage in it.
Yeah,
especially.
But also always recognizing you're not going to please everybody.
Oh, absolutely.
So, some
absolutely.
people, their life is based on the unanswerable question. So it's like, let me see if I can create an unanswerable question. So
yeah,
you gotta let me go now, because I'm starting to drift into that other mode.
So I just want to close before we close out in prayer to mention that next week will be our last Sunday al-Islam discussion for a month until Ramadan begins. And I want to say that I know that we can all remember that that Imam Muhammad mentioned to us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had divinely intervened on our behalf similar to the Jewish people. This statement tells us that the divine intervention has happened for others. He tried to prepare us that our voices would become influential to help solve the world's problems. Every one of you who are listening today know that we are at the table and we are in leadership positions, that what Imam Muhammad told us, we are living today in real time. So I wanted to say that next week, we will have as our guest, Imam Darnell Kareem. He is one of our oldest national pioneers, a treasure in this community. He has accepted to provide from the Qur'an what he believes is proof of this idea that Imam Muhammad shared, this vision that he shared, the responsibility and leadership that we have today. So until we meet again, remember Allah created in our nature, he inspires it and he guides us with the ability to know justice and truth, to feel kindness, mercy, empathy and love towards one another. He created the beauty around us as proof of his presence and his power. Remember, verily, those who say our Lord is Allah and remain firm, on them shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. Your sister and friend, Brother Imam, can you please close us in prayer?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim Maliki Yawm ad-Din Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim as-sirata alladhina an'amta 'alayhim غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين وربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. O Allah, let not our hearts deviate now to your guidance right, and grant us a mercy from your own presence, for surely you're the grantor of bodies without measure. Amen.
I would be
Thank
remiss if, Brother Imam, hold on one second, because I'm seeing something that I really need to mention. I would, as a mother, the trauma that these marriages bring about for our children. We haven't mentioned that at all. And so I want to encourage those who are on the listening line. There's over 220 people on the line. This is a discussion that you can invite Imam Faheem and Aisha to have this discussion specifically about our children, or about more discussion about polygyny, because this program was just to kind of open the doors to talk about the do's and don'ts according to the Quran, according to the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the law. So please, I encourage each and every one of you, invite them to speak on the trauma that is caused to our children. So I want to just say thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.